Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dignified Resilience. It is my great pleasure to welcome Madinah Javed in this episode. She is a law graduate, writer, and peace activist living in Glasgow, Scotland, with a particular interest in human rights. She's also Qariya, reciter of the Qur'an, holy book for Muslims, like myself, and she's working towards reviving the sacred tradition of female Qur'an recitation. She set up the Female Reciters campaign on social media, raising awareness of Muslim women's voices in this tradition of recitation and then more broadly. I'm truly excited to have her on the podcast today, and we have been planning this since the month of July. But with scheduling, prep, research, and some obligations we both had, we just got together now. I am glad for it though, because I checked and our email thread contains about 40 emails back and forth right now of sharing information and things we both researched, and we deepened our connection and friendship and sisterhood in this bonding process around something we both care about. So I'm actually very grateful for this journey that took a few months and which led to today's realization. I so much admire the resilience with which Madinah promotes the dignity of fellow Muslim women towards greater and more just spiritual fulfillment that women deserve and which actually belongs to them. And I'll just add quickly for starters that in some countries around the world where there is a Muslim majority, like Malaysia, Indonesia, Bosnia, where I come from, Turkey here and there, depending on the environment, and in other countries in the Middle East or North Africa, performance for mixed audiences is acceptable behavior for both sexes. And there, women recite in many types of public gatherings. However, in other countries where this is not an accepted social custom, female reciters are heard only by all women audiences. We will unpack all of it today, and there is so much to talk about. So I suggest we dive in. And first of all, I want to welcome Medina and Salam alaikum. And I'll start with how are you, my dear, today?
Assalamu alaikum. I am so delighted, so excited to be here with you, and thank you so much for your beautiful introduction. It really touched my heart, and I really feel a real connection with you, and I really love what you're doing, and I couldn't have asked for a better person to have a conversation with today.
Our feelings are mutual. I'm really so excited. And I was thinking, maybe, what do you think? Should we start our today's conversation with Hayat, as we say, with a short recitation of the Quran, of something upon your choice?
I would love to start with a recitation from the chapter in Qur'an, which is called Woman. And I love the verse which asks those who believe to stand firm for justice. And this is something that I really have felt very inspired by in my life. So I thought it would be perfect to start with.
Absolutely. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. صدق الله العظيم.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, back to the earthly world.
It's always like when you finish reciting Qur'an, there is just such peacefulness, and you just, it's just a nice moment.
There's nothing like it. Only goosebumps and awe and bewilderment for me. So, Medina, tell us a bit about yourself. How did this campaign come to be? I mean, we do know that over 1,400 years ago in the month of Ramadan, the first verse of the Quran was revealed, and it was, we know from the 96th surah, it was recite, read in the name of your Lord who created you. And ever since then, Muslims have been reading the Quran in these beautiful recitations, which is actually an art form, and we'll talk about it later on. But tell us, let's start with your personal story before we get to the general, more broader discussion, I guess, or conversation about female reciters of the Quran.
I'm from Glasgow, Scotland, and this is where I grew up. And I decided to study law because I had such an interest in justice and human rights. And so I studied at Glasgow Caledonian University and also the University of Glasgow. And at the same time as my educational studies, I also am a community activist. So I'm involved in the Andalus Community Hub and Beacon Institute in Glasgow. And there we work towards sharing our rich and diverse Muslim tradition while also embracing our Scottish roots. And the centre was actually set up by my parents, who, aside from their full-time careers, dedicate any and whatever spare time they have to giving back to the community and serving the community for a better future. So creating this vibrant, unique, dynamic centre was a way for them to create this really lovely space for the family to come together. So it's not just a women-only place or a men-only place, but it's a place for the family to be welcome and to be involved and contribute. There wasn't just the mosque aspect, but also educational, recreational, and social. So we have a cafe, we have a community garden, a sports hall, a community cinema. And we do, throughout the years, we've done so many different activities, such as Qur'an classes, of course. And the important thing is they wanted to teach Qur'an in a way that was a really positive environment. Often in many places, people grow up learning the Qur'an, but it might not be a positive atmosphere. Like they might be, if they make a mistake, they might not be treated so nicely. And my parents wanted to they didn't want to send their children to somewhere like that. So they wanted to create an alternative and create a place where people could feel the love for the Quran and feel connected with it. But at the same time, also be involved in other things such as art classes, outdoor pursuits and activities, lots of festivals and lots of different activities. So my parents were always thinking outside of the box and always helping others. I was given a lot of freedom growing up in this really positive environment, and I was encouraged to think for myself and also, I think, think really critically as well. And that's sort of how I kind of developed as a really strong and fiercely independent person because of this environment that I grew up in. And I also am a women's rights campaigner, and I think this ties in really nicely with my legal studies as well. And if you even look at Harvard University, there's a quote from the Qur'an, like the one that I recited today, about standing firm for justice. And these themes from the Qur'an are so relevant to our lives today, of course. And yeah, so I launched the female reciters movement to raise awareness, as you mentioned, of women who vocalize the Qur'an in public, and also to encourage more women to share their recitations in an online space. And the reason I've been pushing this movement for so many years is actually to for the sake of what is truthful and inspired within our rich and diverse Islamic tradition.
Of course, and we'll talk about it as well. Are you aware of the campaign with hashtag add a female reciter, which was started in 2015 in the United States by Jerusha Tanner Rhodes, who is an associate professor of Islam and interreligious engagement at Union Theological Seminary in New York? Have you heard of it? Basically on Ramadan, to tell our listeners, because I want to hear how is that campaign different from yours, or is it different? During our holy month, Muslims read from the Qur'an each evening during what are called the Tarawih prayers. So in 2015, Dr. Jerusha realized there were no female reciters then. So that led her to start the campaign as well as an online petition. And I was researching kind of, and I read a couple of articles from 2015, which are still very valid today, when she said basically, Religion News Service, this is an issue of representation and inclusion. And she said, there's nothing that bars females from reciting the Qur'an. In fact, it is incumbent on all Muslims to learn it and recite it daily without distinction in gender. But many women don't hear or see people who look or sound like them reciting the Qur'an. So have you heard of it, and how is it different, or is it different than your campaign?
I remember growing up when I was reciting Qur'an and learning the Qur'an, a lot of my teachers were women from like different places like Qatar and Syria. And as I was growing up, I was always interested to hear women reciters. And growing up, there's lots of websites and Qur'an apps that are recommended for use of learning and listening to reciters. And there's not any women reciters or any qari'as. There's just all men. And it was really beautiful what this Add a Female Reciter campaign highlighted. The fact that, for example, we have Maria Ulfa, who has recorded the complete Qur'an, and she's an expert reciter. So her recitation is of a very, very high standard, and we don't see her recitation included. So I fully supported the campaign and the petition, and I remember signing it as I was quite young then as well. It was quite a few years ago, and yeah, I really love that idea. And I think it's still a problem today, and it's still valid. And I think still we don't have Maria Ulfa's voice on these Qur'an apps, and it's just ridiculous because there's no reason to exclude women from that. So I think this campaign was a really amazing way to pave even my movement forward, and also and I hope that it will thrive and that it will have a positive outcome in the future, even if it takes a lot of time. I hope that one day we will be seeing Qur'an apps using featuring female reciters. So yeah, I think, and also in America, at one of the Islamic conferences, there was a woman called Tahira Ahmed, and she also recited the Qur'an at the beginning of one of the conferences. And I found that really inspiring because it showed me as well that I can do that too in my community. And in our centre in Andalus, I would often recite the Qur'an anyway because I was teaching it and learning it. I was teaching the Qur'an classes there, so I was always used to reciting publicly as a way of teaching for the children. So I was already quite confident in doing that. And then sometimes if we would have like an event, like a cinema screening or a gathering, I would open it up with a recitation of the Qur'an, as Muslims usually do when we have a gathering. We would open it up with a recitation. And it was interesting because sometimes I remember we had a guest speaker come to our centre and do a workshop, and then I said, maybe I should recite Qur'an at the beginning of this. Wouldn't that be nice? And so I recited the Qur'an in my community centre, and actually this woman said, this is not allowed. We can't be hearing women reciting Qur'an beautifully like this. And I remember my dad just saying, coming in and just defending me and saying, actually, no, there's a whole history of women in our tradition and in our scholarship. And at that point, I didn't really know, I didn't really know much about this. And it was just the beginning of my journey, I think. And I also recited at, we had a film screening called Blessed Are the Strangers in our community centre cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a diverse audience of different people. So there was Muslims and non-Muslims, some traditional scholars from the local community, but also some other scholars too. And I also opened it up with Surah Hashr, just like Tahir Ahmed opened her recitation with Surah Hashr, the same verses I used. And afterwards, it was really beautiful because one of the scholars, he's a convert, and I didn't expect this, but he afterwards, when there was no one there, he came up to me and he said, you know, thank you for that. That was really pure. And I had never had any scholar say to me or appreciate or acknowledge what I had, you know, the recitation. So I was really, really touched by that. But it also showed the difference between, you know, I think converts don't have that same sort of gender and cultural baggage that a lot of maybe traditional and local scholars do. So the other scholars in attendance didn't really say anything about it. But I think maybe if it was my brother reciting Qur'an, the reaction might have been different, or if it was a male reciter. So
You
even
raised
on
very important points, though. There, you raised a point, a very important point, how there was a woman who actually came up to you and said, "Oh, women cannot do that," and this and that. So it's a good reminder and a reality check that it's not just necessarily men who might be saying, "Oh, this is not allowed," or not. No, this is precisely the proof and the testimony of the kind of knowledge that is being transmitted to men and women, who then internalize these interpretations as such. So that all the more important, like you say, to share this knowledge and to say what is said, what is not said, what is a local tradition and culture, and what is really in the Quran. So I think before we continue, to just make some things clear for our listeners, Muslim and non-Muslim, what is behind the idea that some Muslims propagate about a woman's voice is that would make women not allowed to recite the Quran. And part of the reason for the exclusion comes from a specific interpretation of a Quranic verse extolling the wives of the Prophet, not to be, quote, soft in speech. So there is it's the 32nd ayah of the 33rd surah, and it says, "O wives of the Prophet, you are not like any other women. If you are righteous, then do not speak too softly, lest one in whose heart is a disease will move with desire. You shall speak in an honorable manner." And while I was preparing for our podcast, I was researching both this surah and this interpretation, and I found a great explanation. I can share the links of everything because it's online, of literally deconstructing this twisted interpretation into a different thing, basically saying, on a website, Quranic Path, it is surprising that such a verse has been turned upside down in such a way to mean something completely different to the true meaning of the verse, which is so clear to the genuine non-biased reader of the Quran. If we were to show a non-word for word translation based on what we have analyzed, it would be as follows. Imagine the same ayah, the same surah. Wives of the prophets, you are not like other women. If you're truly righteous, do not yield to them with your words, in case the hypocrite man or woman will be tempted to plot, to take advantage, or make mischief. Pick well-chosen words when speaking to them. So imagine the nuance and the difference in the interpretation, and how important it is and how consequential a literalist interpretation of a verse from a holy book can be. And this is just one occasion. There are myriad other cases where this is having really bad consequences for women and men around the world. And you probably experienced this, Medina. Of course, we all often hear explanations that some Muslims reject the female Quran reciters because they may distract or sexually arouse men gathered for prayer. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, Medina?
So I think what's really to start with, what is really beautiful that I love about Islam is that women have a direct connection to God. And yeah, so I think that is just really simple and it's really powerful at the same time. We just have a direct connection to God. It doesn't have to go through anyone else. Yeah. And it's really important that we see women actually engaging with the Qur'an in different ways, whether it's as a reciter or a scholar or a commentator, because men certainly do not have ownership of the Qur'an. But often we tend to see that a lot of sciences of Islam, are through the lens of specifically through the lens of male scholars, and sadly sometimes through female scholars who propagate those male views, and then this vicious cycle sort of continues. So I think it's really important that we not only listen to women reciting the Qur'an, but it goes much deeper than that. We should actually also be listening to women's perspectives and their point of view, and also listening to what it means for women too. And certainly, I remember when I was looking online to find more female reciters, I saw so many men uploading videos of Qur'an recitation online, and I was wondering why can't I find any women? And I was so passionate about this, and because I love the recitation so much, and I wanted to listen to more women. So I just actually thought, okay, if I'm doing this, and I'll just share like a video, and then I came up with the hashtag female reciters. And even recently, I was coming up with an Arabic hashtag of the equivalent of female reciters, and I was discussing with one of my friends, and she speaks Arabic, and I had thought that the word qari'a would be used, and then she was saying, wouldn't it be qari? And I was saying, no, is the feminine not qari'a? And she was just saying, actually, that's right, because I all the time just always hear the word qari, like growing up online, and she's more exposed to sort of Arabic online outlets. And that is interesting that in the terminology of language, there is also that disproportion that people are not as aware of the word qariya or qariyat. I think that was also quite telling. And even when you look online and I search female reciters in Arabic or in English, there's not many examples, but if you search up the male equivalent qari, there's like countless examples. Mm-hmm. So I think that really, really showed that there is something missing here, and that we need to raise awareness of the examples of women doing it in different parts of the world who are already doing it, and just to create like that online space for them to come together so we can hear women reciting. And also like something really special when I first created the hashtag, I actually came across this lady, and her name is Fazila Selberg Zaib, and she used the hashtag female reciters, but at this time it was the early stages of me using the hashtag, and I came across her using it, and she'd written this really beautiful and powerful post, and it was about Muraqa, and if I'd like to share what she wrote, because I found it so powerful and so inspiring. So she said, the Muslim soundtrack is a male one. It has been for as long as I have a memory, and for as vastly as I have travelled this world, and that is vast. I scrolled down the list of Qur'an chapters on Spotify for several minutes to see if a female reciter would pop up, but not a single one showed up. And growing up, I couldn't find a single woman reciting Qur'an on CDs or tapes, let alone live, unless it was an all-female gathering. Now there are some female reciters entering competitions, and we can only hope they enter our homes as well. And I found her question here so powerful. She said, how did we as a Muslim community decide that women should not be heard reciting in public? What distortion are we consuming when there were women during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whose Qur'an recital was so beautiful and so loud it could be heard echoing on the streets for men and women to appreciate and hear? I at times wonder at the spiritual lobotomy that has taken place among us in the last centuries. I pray that God keeps it far away from me and the walls of my home, and that we free ourselves of these ungodly chains. So when I read this, I was so inspired and so moved, and this was the first time that I had learned about this woman, Muraqa, and it was so, just the way she wrote what she did, it was so powerful and strong, and it really inspired me, and that was at the very beginning of when I had launched the tag. And there's also another female scholar who is born in Germany, and her name is Sheikha Halima Krausen, and she called for more public awareness many years ago, and she was saying that actually it's women who are doing the real work in communities, but in general, women have been hesitant when an issue seems to go against her traditions. So she said that when she suggested that women could recite, maybe do something in public, reciting the Qur'an, for example, it's just the people that just go ahead and do it. Once a few people just get started, they set a precedent and it starts the ball rolling, and that's like a really good way of working. And I think, I find that so beautiful, because the Qur'an in itself, it is, when you recite it, the Qur'an is a recited book, so Qur'an means recitation, and it's always moving and it's flowing and it's dynamic and it's not still. So actually in our lives we should be actively doing things, and it was really, so when I had recited at the British Museum, somebody shared a tweet online saying recitation brings movement in a place of status. And I think that is also so powerful, because the Quran, as I said, it's moving and it's flowing and it changes us, and we're trying to, our aim is to try to live the Quran, and to live the Quran we have to be actively doing things. And if you look at like when people are trying to control, there is always like some sort of like stillness, and like, because control is about stillness and no change and resistance and no movement. But actually if you think about it, the Quran is moving, it's flowing, and I reflected on that, and I just found that such a beautiful way of thinking about it. And it's really beautiful, because while people are trying to restrict something that is so like flowing and dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
and there's also this really beautiful quote which says, Islam was said to be like a crystal river that has no colour in its own water, which is life-giving water, but it would take on the colours of the stones over which it flowed. And I think this really shines a light on the diversity of cultures around the world, and also the gender and cultural baggage that has developed. So often women will only recite in female only gatherings, and that's often because of people's cultural upbringing, just what they're used to becoming right for them. So when I myself have traveled around the world and encountered different Muslim communities, I've experienced being treated really differently as a young woman who recites. So in some places I found that actually my presence and my voice was welcomed, and I was encouraged to recite, and I was appreciated by women and men. But in other spaces I was an anomaly, and as a female reciter, and I've even been shunned by women and men quite often. So I think the key message is, if you think about it, people should really be people should really be listening to God's words rather than thinking about gender or colour or dress. It's not about the reciter as a person, it's about the meaning of what's being recited and the message. And why are Muslims, really getting distracted by superficial things like gender or dress or race? These are not, we should be thinking about the really important things, which is the meaning and thinking about God's words. And
yeah, and I mean, I'll definitely ask you about several things in your experiences from different countries as well in a bit. I did also, when you were talking, it reminded me of, well, I do want to kind of break it up and explain a little bit more and enter into some not shaky but important theological points that have impacted today's reality as well, and not just theology or interpretations of the Quran, but also, like you said, there's a lot of local tradition and local customs as well. But what I do want to add is, okay, so now we've said if there's nothing that bars females from reciting the Quran, and the Quran, by the way, let's say, has or should have the supreme authority on Islamic belief and practice. I'm not going to get into now the hadith and everything that some even falsified hadith can brought within our practices, but absolutely, like you mentioned as well, but the differences between early Islamic community and today are quite stark, and we see it in many areas of just lived experience. And the status of women began to change following the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And that is a topic of its own, and myriad books and articles have written by scholars, male and female, on how that happened. But I do want to mention something, a few other pertinent factors and facts, which I was reminded of while preparing for the podcast and reading a book, which is currently a bestseller in Turkish in that branch. It's still not published in English, but it's by my friend, a theologian, actually Turkish scholar, Caner Taslaman and Feryal Kalkavan Taslaman, who recently wrote a book together named Women in Islam. And while reading it, I was reminded how besides those patriarchal interpretations of some Quranic verses, like we mentioned earlier, one reason why societal perceptions of women, of Muslim women, have changed is also because of very influential Islamic scholars like Al-Ghazali, who wrote in their book, and I will quote them actually, this Turkish scholar who wrote about Ghazali said, while Ghazali was a genius, like other philosophers such as Aristotle, who lived hundreds of years before him and who considered women a distorted version of men, he also disparaged women. So according to him, society could survive only by encouraging man's superiority. And he also said that keeping women and men apart was important for the sake of society. And in his very famous Ihya Ulumuddin, Ghazali, who is, again, one of the most prominent Islamic scholars with many contributions that I do not deny whatsoever, described the duties of a Muslim woman in a way, literally, and from this book I'm quoting, she should live in the deeper recesses of her home. She should not leave her spindle from her hand. She should not come and go from her house too frequently. She should limit conversations with her neighbors and should visit them only when necessary, etc., etc. She should refrain from making her voice heard and from revealing herself to a stranger. She should conceal her presence from someone she thinks knows her or from someone she thinks she knows, etc., etc. So as Caner Taslaman writes in this book, identifying Ghazali's views with Islam has likely damaged more women than those of other misogynistic philosophers or scholars. So, and by the way, it's not like all male scholars of the time had this perceptions of women. There's Ibn Rushd, like Islamic theologian, like Averroes, who supported the education of women at the time on the basis that they're intellectually equal to men. And if they're not, they would be a burden to society and cause poverty, which is also written in this book. What I'm trying to get at, and to add to this, I would warmly recommend to everybody to read the book written by American scholar Zahra Ayubi, called, I don't know, have you heard about it? The book is called Gendered Morality, Classical Islamic Ethics of the Self, Family, and Society, and it was published last year. It's really good and so important because she examines three foundational classical akhlaq texts by Al-Ghazali, Nasir ad-Din Tusi, and Jalal ad-Din Dawani. And she writes in the book, and look, this was just one quote out of 1,000 that I put out. She says, in the conclusion, I have argued that the ethicist metaphysics and their virtue ethics are both hierarchical and contradict their own overarching goal of akhlaq, which is to create the vicegerency of God that in turn facilitates conditions of human happiness and fulfillment of human's cosmic purpose. And then she, of course, because she says that women as a class are construed as merely instrumental to elite men's ethical endeavors, which are to order the nafs and achieve vicegerency as khilafa. So in this book, she calls for a philosophical turn in the study of gender of Islam in order to kind of grapple with such issues and proposes some ways to think about them in terms of moving forward. So long story short, we kind of have, and there is then colonialism afterwards, which made a lot of different fatwas in Egypt, etc. We might mention it or not later on. There are different pieces of puzzle that have been kind of put together here and there throughout history that are, what I want to emphasize, not in the Qur'an, which should be the superior authority for us Muslims. And that is why I am both surprised by, but also not by everything that's continuing to happen because it's just a manifestation of archaic interpretations and misogynistic remnants. But let's also add to this something that you wrote to me in one of our correspondences, which I thought was so important, and I want to talk about it. You said you went to an interfaith event recently, and you had an interaction with, I believe it was a Jewish woman who told you about similar occurrences within their tradition and communities. Can you tell us a little bit more about it so that we can broaden it up and make it known that the more we talk about it, it seems obvious that it's currently we're talking about Muslims and things within Islamic traditions, but it's much broader than that, right? And goes beyond just Islam. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience in this sense from interactions with other non-Muslims?
I've been invited to do a lot of different interfaith events to recite Qur'an and also engage in dialogue with people of different faiths. And actually, when explaining the reasons why women have been restricted, and it's been interesting because, for example, when I did, a Jewish lady was saying, actually, that's the same thing in our tradition. Women are also prevented from doing this because apparently their voice is going to be distracting, or it's too attractive, or so they have this same sort of narrative that is used. And again, this is sort of argument is very objectifying, and we need to remember, like, our history and the Muslim tradition. There's in biographical dictionaries, there are so many Muslim women jurists, scholars who taught men and actually used their voices. And and I think we need to get away from this objectification and actually start to appreciate the meanings and the wisdoms behind what is being conveyed, as opposed to targeting the person. And also, like, even if you think about it, like, the Quran in itself is, you're going to have so many blessings from listening to it. It's like when you recite the Quran, it's an act of charity. Mm-hmm. Why do we want to prevent people from listening to something good that's going to bring blessings? And if you think about it so simply, why do you want to restrict someone from bringing people to success and to goodness? So I think certainly we need to be having some consideration. And also, this matter isn't isolated to the Muslim tradition, as you mentioned. Like, even in other Abrahamic faiths, there has been this notion that a woman's voice shouldn't be heard. Women should be secluded. They shouldn't be seen. They shouldn't be heard. And actually, this is not something that comes from our faith, but it's actually, it's coming from patriarchy, misogyny, and also, and we need to really be working together as women in solidarity with each other to be looking at these issues, and actually to be finding our voices and to be using them. And that's part of the female reciters movement. It is to encourage women to do that, to reclaim their voices. So this isn't something new. Women have been reciting the Quran for so long. If you go to other countries, and you will hear women reciting, and we even know the examples of Raqa, and also another example of, in the time of the Prophet heard a woman reciting from Surah Al-Ghashiyah, and he didn't stop her. So, I think we really need to be thinking about these things. And also, and if we think about, like, today's society as well, like, I live in Scotland, so it's the culture and society also, has an impact on my upbringing and what I'm used to. So I'm used to taking, like, such an active role in society and having my voice heard and being given space to speak and things like that. But I think maybe in some other cultures, like, and I remember when I went to Yemen when I was younger, oftentimes women would be quite secluded and they wouldn't be seen, and it's just part of their culture.
But absolutely what you mentioned also reminded me, again, when I read it in that email, when you share that about, it reminded me of a book that I read a couple of years back. So I went back online, found it, and I looked some parts of it that talks about similar conversations within Christianity as well. And it was a book that was entitled Jesus Feminist, written by a prominent now a Christian female scholar, Sarah Bessey. And in that book, the author reminds her readers of some verses from the letters of Paul, which literally say in the Corinthians 14:34-35, it is not proper for them to speak. They should be submissive, just as the law says. If they have any questions, they should ask their husbands at home, for it is improper for women to speak in church meetings. And then another verse that she cites from Timothy 2:11-12, saying women should learn quietly and submissively. I do not let women teach men or have authority over them. Let them listen quietly. So she is using those, and she was kind of describing similar things, basically saying, she writes, I quote, as women, we often hear this mandate to be submissive, to be silent in the context of our souls being crushed in big and small ways. And the arc of our interpretations have real hurtful and sometimes dangerous implications. And then she goes on and she's talking about the context of those verses, what is an interpretation, and basically kind of just saying something that you mentioned as well. She writes, when women are restricted from the service of God in any capacity, the church is mistakenly allowing an imperfect male-dominated ancient culture to drive our understanding and practice of Christ's redeeming work instead of Jesus Christ and the whole of scriptures. It is crucial that we understand Paul's overall perspectives on the role and place of women, as well as the specific context within which he wrote these particular portions of his letters. I mean, we're talking here about a different faith, but like you say, there is a pattern. There is obviously a clear pattern, and the similar conversations that have been going on within different religious communities as well. And let's mention that it's also patriarchy exists in communities that are not just religious as well. This is just a manifestation of it because it's very powerful. And as again, we don't even have something like this in the Qur'an. So I just wanted to show kind of a variety, and this is just a glimpse of different influences within different religions, but with some absolutely interpretational patterns that are patriarchal and limiting of women for their really, like you mentioned, just spiritual fulfillment, goodness. I mean, what are we taking off from somebody by just demanding something that belongs to us and that is given by God? So there's a lot of just I mean, yes, okay, sometimes it's anger or something, but honestly, this is profoundly saddening to me. It's always so saddening, and it's something that it's how much zulm, how much injustice we Muslims do to each other, or how much male-oriented interpretations that have been formed in those important times continue to be prevalent. But I am confident, and we'll talk about it more about, like we said before, about connecting with each other and sharing these good messages and showing basically that this is something that is part of our religion and part of our faith. So tell us then, because we mentioned earlier on that this is, tell us what is tajweed. And who recites the Quran, because it truly is an art form. And who are you working with, and are you working on continuously perfecting it? Do you have a special teacher, etc.? Tell us a little bit more about tajweed.
I just want to add one comment to what you said as well before I mention it. So I really love, in the Quran, it gives actually examples of women, using their voices, and actually, like, I love, the verse in the Quran where it says men and women should be protecting friends of one another. And I think that is so lovely. And because they're allies protecting friends of one another. So even like, we shouldn't be thinking lowly of each other, but we should even just try to be dignified people. And also actually, like, the objectification can go both ways. So women can be objectified, but also so can men. Like, attraction, this argument about attraction is just, it's not one-sided. That's as if like women, as if women can't be attracted to men either. And that's, you can like argue that, because it's just not realistic. So even if I think the thing is like a woman should not like curb her piety, and also like in a space where you have something so pure and sacred, our consideration is actually on purity and sincerity and the meaning and just connecting to that, as opposed to other like superficial matters on gender. And I think especially when I remember when I recited Qur'an in the cathedral, in St Mary's Cathedral, and I didn't know how the Christians would, respond to it, because maybe they hadn't probably heard a recitation before, and it's still quite new to people in the West, because it's not been heard here. I think they've often probably heard men reciting the Quran, but not women, and actually a lot of people have commented saying that it's really special to hear women reciting Quran, and actually it's so symbolic. You don't have to say anything. It shows like a woman connecting with God and reciting so powerfully and so strongly, and it has so much symbolism in it, because I think it just oftentimes Muslim women are defined in the media and defined in such negative ways, but often we don't hear from Muslim women themselves. But when you see a Muslim woman reciting Quran, you can see like the love that she has for it. And when I shared videos of women reciting Quran in Bosnia when I was in the women's mosque, people said these women look so connected, so like strong and confident. And I think it's really a powerful message to see that. So I just wanted to mention that. And then also another thing I wanted to mention was when I did recite the Quran in a cathedral, the comments, I want to just talk about the comments that I was getting from Muslims, because I think it's important to look at the difference.
Yeah.
People have this baggage of gender and culture. So basically, when I recited Quran in the cathedral, and my dad sort of was recording it, and it was such a beautiful event, and the recitation was just a small part of the ceremony. I heard the Christian hymns and the service, so it was really lovely. And afterwards, a lot of the congregation came up to me and really thanked me for sharing the recitation of Quran. It was the first time they had heard a woman reciting, and I didn't realize like anyone would want to thank me or to express appreciation or acknowledgement. And they were saying things that were so beautiful, like that I didn't even expect. Like some people were saying that they felt angels, that they were so touched, that they had tears in their eyes, and they really connected with it. And because it was such a beautiful occasion, I shared a video online. And obviously when you online, you have a wider audience, you still have like a lot of detractors, a lot of supporters, but it reaches a lot of different people. And it's just interesting to observe the comments coming in from Muslims, and how a lot of them were commenting like things like, why are you wearing shoes? Why are you reciting in a church? Why are you reciting Quran? You're mocking my deen. And it's just really troubling to think about, they're thinking about really superficial things. But actually, if you compare it to what the other people are saying, you can see that the other people really see the purity and sincerity and the meaning coming through. So I just think that's like a really important thing to highlight, just the way different people respond to it. The recitation of the Quran in itself, there's a whole science to it, and this is called tajweed, and this is to do with making your recitation better. So reciting the Quran is something that all Muslims will learn how to do from a young age, because we have to recite the Quran in our worship. So actually everyone, I always say, like, all women are female reciters, all women recite the Quran, because everyone recites the Quran. It's just, in some cases, in public gatherings, often it will just be men that are heard reciting the Quran. So young people, when they're younger, they will learn tajweed and they will learn how to recite. So it's actually a really detailed science, and it's a real skill. And I love to compare it to maybe like learning to play a musical instrument or something like that. When I was younger, in school, in primary school, we learned to play the recorder, and to do that, it requires a lot of practice and skills, and in terms of reading it. So in tajweed, like, each letter has different characteristics and there's different lengths, different timings. There's so much to take consideration for, and it requires a lot of practice. You have to give like a lot of time in your life to develop that skill. Just like with any other skill, the more you practice it, the better that you get at it. And I started off by learning because in our community centre, started off by learning, and then because I was teaching it so much, I think teaching is like the best way of learning, and that really strengthened my skills because I was practicing and reciting it a lot. And then I also recited the Qur'an to an examiner who is in Syria, and she listened to me reciting. I'm still working on the memorization for Ijaza, and I'm also still trying to develop and still become better. There's always I still think I'm still a beginner, and I'm still learning. And yes, so I'm just sharing my journey on my journey. And yeah, so everyone can recite, but different people will have different proficiencies. And having an online campaign, you're going to have people from different parts of the world. Maybe some people haven't been able to have a good teacher. Maybe people haven't learned correctly how to recite the Qur'an. But I think it's really beautiful how in our tradition, in the Muslim tradition, there's a teaching that the person who recites the Qur'an and they make a mistake or they recite something incorrectly, they actually get double the reward of the person who recites it like proficiently. So I think that just shows that the Qur'an is for everyone. And I think women and people who are learning the Qur'an should be kind to themselves and just give yourself a bit of time to make it a part of your life and really connect with it. And it just shows that it really doesn't matter. But I think the recitation, we recite it, we have the tajweed to make sure we're reciting it correctly. So if we, for example, pronounce something wrong, it might change the meaning. So that's why it's really important that we have it so that the Quran is recited exactly the same as it was in the time of the Prophet. And of course, actually, the Quran was an oral tradition, so people were learning it and memorizing it in that way. And then the tajweed sort of rules came a bit later so that people could recite and be able to read it.
You mentioned so many important things. I mean, just about the different kind of implications for and literally just sad results that are coming out of this claims about Muslim women in terms of the consequences for their leadership and power in today's world as well. But besides that, also when you were talking about almost how beautiful and important it is to listen to the Quran, while I was preparing for this episode, I found so many articles, and I told you about it, that I kind of knew, but then to read it from a scientific point of view made it even more salient. I quite a few articles, for example, about the efficacy of Surah Al-Rahman in managing depression of Muslim women. This is an article that was published in Journal of Religious Health in 2019, so quite recent, by Rafia Rafiq, Afia Anjum, and Shazli Rahim. And basically what they were talking about in the article is they say Surah Al-Rahman is the most rhythmic surah of the Quran, so it was used for their experimental study. And the idea of the study was drawn from the premise that music therapy helps reduce depression. So they were going to kind of check the efficacy of this surah for managing depression in Muslim women admitted for treatment of major depressive disorder in a psychiatry ward of a government hospital. So basically they did experiment with two groups. Then they listened to 22 minutes 2 times a day within a period of 4 weeks, and they were listening to Surah Ar-Rahman recited by Qari Abdul Basit, and the results showed that both groups had decreased level of depression. One was listening to Quran, the other one was listening to kind of just relaxing music. But the one group that listened to the Quran using medical names of the tests I'm not familiar with, showed that the treatment group that was listening to the Quran had significantly greater decrease than the control group on depression. So listening to the Quran helped these Muslim women patients. And I was just wondering, goodness, why don't we allow them the choice of maybe even listening to a female qari'ah? Why are we not allowing maybe, in this, we're talking even about health. Then I found another article similarly proving the thing. It was done in 2010 in Iran, but it's online, about women before C-section listening to the Qur'an and how much it helped them as well. So then I was thinking, good, I mean, we're talking even about health. It's wonderful. I know it soothes me, but why are we again not allowing the option and possibility of having female reciters in a way that maybe some women as patients, not to even speak about men, here I'm speaking about women, but maybe even men, might respond better in terms of connecting, in terms of just a voice that might work with their psyche better in ways that we can understand or not. And it was just amazing for me to keep reading these medical kind of scientific articles, so that we know that listening to the Quran, yes, like you said, is a sunnah, it's an act of piety in our religion as well. But here we have also, we're restricting potentially even patients of different medical conditions in terms of their access to better healing. So if you want some practical and more practical ways and necessities, I couldn't find a more salient and important one. And who knows, this is just for depression and for C-section, for many other diseases and patients as well. So whether it's so it's important that technology now allows us, and thanks to people like you who are calling and inviting more female reciters to do it and to make it available. So now the scholars who are doing these experiments can maybe try, if this ever reaches them, if our podcast ever reaches some medical students' ears who happen to want to do these experiments, just kind of another practical reason of the consequences and the potential implications, the results of which we are not even aware because we are not allowing it as a part of that treatment as well. It was really, while preparing for this episode, it was really a huge discovery process for me as well, in terms of expanding my own knowledge and understanding how important your movement